It's been something of a roller coaster ride in our country this year, has it not? With lots of ups and downs from month to month, week to week, even day to day. Let me assure you, I have no intention of coming in here and giving my take on the political horse race that seems to dominate the headlines every single day. As I say to every group I meet with these days, our faith is not about personalities and political parties. It's about values and visions. Values of justice and equity, visions of dignity and worth and beloved community, as opposed to the oppression or exclusion or devaluing of any person or group. We're about values of pluralism and interdependence, learning from each other, being part of a larger whole rather than being part of divisiveness or an us versus them mindset. We're about values of transformation and generosity, seeing life as about growing and giving, not life as about living only for ourselves or getting ahead at the expense of others. Above all, our faith is about love, caring for people and the planet in our lives and in our actions. And so my intention today is to offer some reflections on our values and visions, particularly our value of interdependence, as it relates to some of the underlying realities and overarching opportunities of our current era. I hope I can offer some reflections on the big picture and what we can do in that big picture. Reflections that I hope will remain relevant for the long haul, whatever happens this week or this month or even later this year. Our UU value of interdependence is a wonderfully high-minded philosophy. You could even call it a spirituality that says we're all interconnected with each other as human beings and with all that is through the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. I personally find it useful to lean into that sense of interdependence when I'm dealing with conflict or facing a new group, to know that we're all connected at a deep level with each other as human beings of equal worth and value, and with the web of life as a whole. It helps to calm the anxiety that I think we all feel at one time or another. I invite you to take just a moment with me and breathe. Breathe in interdependence and breathe out peace. Breathe in connection and breathe out love. Breathe in respect and reverence for the web of life, ourselves, each other. And breathe out humility and healing for the web of life, ourselves, each other. Breathe in. Breathe out. Thank you. Interdependence is at the core of our collective existence, or so we claim in both our old statements of principles and our new statements of values. That's what we say is at the core of our existence, and yet our collective experience of our existence, especially these last few years, is not one of connection and interdependence, but rather of division and alienation. We experience ourselves as a divided society, alienated from each other across this political spectrum. Increasingly, we're experiencing the effects of disconnection from the planet that sustains us. At a deeper and more personal level, we're experiencing what the U.S. Surgeon General has called an epidemic of loneliness and isolation from each other. And so the prevailing story or narrative in our society seems not to be, we're all connected, we're all in this together, but rather a story of either you're on your own, so watch out for yourself, or it's a story of us versus them, and for us to win, they have to lose. We seem to be locked in never-ending, zero-sum, life-or-death battle with each other, and it's hard to see where this leaves us. I think it's particularly hard to find a story of empowerment and hope in our recent history, when every win seems to be followed by a loss, every powerful uprising seems to be followed by an equally powerful backlash, and every step forward seems to be followed by a step or two or three backwards. The back and forth experience of continuing this struggle can leave us tired and exhausted and depleted, a common refrain I hear after years of backlash, pandemic, and the endless replay of battles dating back decades, if not centuries. It can be hard to keep on fighting when we feel like, didn't we fight this battle already? Isn't this ever going to end? It can be hard to keep on going when the emotional or gut-level story we're telling ourselves we're losing, or we might lose, or we're never going to win. And what do we do with that? I think this loss of an empowering story is what has been eating away at many of us in recent times. Yuval Harari, the author of the book Sapiens, talks about this in his more recent book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Harari writes that religion used to provide a meaningful story for much, if not most, of humanity, whether the cyclical stories of our place in the never-ending circle of life, or more linear stories of cosmic fall and redemption. These religious stories have been replaced in recent centuries by more humanistic stories, particularly the story of the inevitability of progress, onward and upward forever, to which many UUs have historically been attracted. The optimism of that progressive vision has long been countered by the regressive vision of the good old days, the narrative that we were better off in the past. And such regressivism has become increasingly popular in light of the cataclysmic events of recent decades, from 9/11 shattering the fantasy of Pax Americana, to the recession, the Great Recession undermining confidence in our economy and our economic system, to the pandemic exposing the massive inequalities embedded in our entire system. The MAGA people are not wrong when they say that the system is rigged against working people. Real wages have been flat, if not declining, for most of the last 40 years, even as the country as a whole has gotten richer. And of course, many people have been led to blame immigrants and people of color, rather than the increasingly rich wealth hoarders behind the curtain, who have captured almost all of the new wealth created over the last 40 years. Those at the top have mastered Kevin Phillips' strategy of stoking blame and division among the rest of us. I got to hear United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain speak at a faith labor breakfast a few months ago, and he pointed out how the 1% have been using issues of race, immigration, and sexuality for years to distract us from what they have been doing by pitting us against each other. And many of us, including many UUs, have been pulled into the 1%'s game, taking up the absolutely necessary struggles for gender justice and migrant justice, but losing sight of the equally necessary struggle for economic justice that is part of an intersectional human rights agenda. We have failed to see how conservative government in collusion with corporate power has shifted trillions of dollars from the poor and working and middle classes to the rich over the last 40 years. Some of us, and I include myself here, haven't seen it because we haven't felt the economic impact ourselves. But the impact is real, and groups like the Poor People's Campaign have worked tirelessly to keep the economic struggles of low-income and working-class people at the center of its intersectional campaign of justice for all. And yet the Poor People's Campaign, with its slogan of forward together and not one step back, has not been able to stem the tide of regressivism, which keeps pushing back on every step forward. We have seen the amazing progress of electing a black president in 2008 pushed back by the rise of the Tea Party in reaction. We've seen the rising strength of Black Lives Matter and other movements knocked back by a fierce backlash in the 2016 elections. We've seen the worldwide uprisings following the death of George Floyd in 2020 put on the defensive more or less continuously ever since. We've seen remarkable wins towards LGBTQ equality, which UUs helped to win here in Illinois and around the country. We've seen these wins increasingly rolled back by relentless anti-trans and anti-gay legislation and vitriol. We've seen the Supreme Court reach back more than 50 years and undo not only Roe v. Wade, but the gains of the civil rights and the environmental and other movements. And underlying it all, we've reverted back to the massive inequality of the Gilded Age of 100 years ago, and we've rolled back much of the progress of the labor movement and the relatively enlightened capitalism of the New Deal. An optimistic narrative of inevitable progress has been profoundly shaken. And for many of us, the 2016 election was such a blow to the gut because deep down we still believed in that optimistic story of progress. I know I did. And now we're struggling not only with the accumulation of losses in terms of policies and their very real impacts on people, we're struggling with the loss of a greater story to guide and underwork undergird our work for justice. So what is a more empowering story to replace that once optimistic story of inevitable progress, onward and upward forever? The book by Leah Hunt Hendricks and Astra Taylor that I read from suggests a possibility rooted in our UU value of interdependence, solidarity, not just as the concept that we are connected, not solidarity as a given, but solidarity as a vision, that there is a greater we yet to be created, and solidarity as a practice, that we create relationships that build that greater we, even with those who differ from us. Hunt Hendricks and Taylor argued that the first step in creating solidarity is generating a larger sense of collective identity by reframing the story of who's there in the struggle with us. Early American protest movements and rebellions brought together people of supposedly separate identities, poor whites, enslaved black people, indentured servants of all races. They generated a collective identity of the common people. Similarly, post-Civil War multiracial fusion coalitions in places like North Carolina recognized the common interests of poor and working people across racial differences. These early fusion movements have been echoed in the more recent rainbow coalitions that elected Harold Washington and Barack Obama. And of course, generating a sense of collective identity among workers has been the genius of the labor movement, helping people see themselves not just as individual employees of a company, but as collective members of a union. Hunt Hendricks and Taylor go on to point out the importance of imagination in generating a sense of collective identity. They illustrate this most clearly in outlining the history of people with disabilities. Now, historically, people with distinctive embodiments or medical conditions saw themselves as just that, individuals or distinct groups with particular impairments. Hunt Hendricks and Taylor write, "It wasn't obvious that they were part of the same us. For solidarity to develop between a deaf person, a blind person, a person with cerebral palsy, a person with polio, a person missing a limb, a person with Down syndrome, and a person with autism or another form of neurodivergence, a shift in consciousness was required, an act of radical imagination." As disability rights organizers generated this sense of collective identity, they won amazing victories, many of which benefited not just them, but society as a whole, the most obvious example being the curb cuts that make it easier for everyone to cross the street. Now we recognize people with disabilities as a community, and the disability rights movement as part of the greater movement for human liberation. Similarly, the sense of collective identity generated among people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender has created the powerful solidarity at the center of the LGBTQ movement. And many of the gains of that movement have also required acts of radical imagination, such as the deep canvassing campaigns that helped pass marriage equality laws around the country a decade ago. These campaigns helped reframe the issue from being about special treatment for some to being about fairness for all, and help a lot of people see that we all have family members and friends of different sexual orientations and gender identities. That movement helped generate a sense of solidarity through our collective identity as human beings, and created a larger we through the narrative that people are people, and love is love. These days, there's a movement reimagining our relationship with nature. Indigenous peoples in New Zealand have spurred passage of groundbreaking laws granting personhood status to national parks and rivers and even whales, declaring them legal entities with all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. India has declared personhood rights for the Ganges and Yamuna rivers, as well as the Himalayan glaciers. Bangladesh has granted all of its rivers the same rights as people. Ecuador and Bolivia both have rights of nature clauses in their constitutions. And here in the US, the Ho-Chunk Nation in Wisconsin and the Ponca Nation in Oklahoma have declared that nature has rights that humans are bound to respect. These are all efforts to imagine a new sense of collective identity that includes all species of life, the land and the water, and ultimately the planet itself, as part of a greater collective we. Now, admittedly, solidarity with the earth may seem a long way from where we are now. And yet consider how unlikely black-white solidarity on the scale of the George Floyd uprisings seemed not so long ago, or solidarity between disabled people, or between gay and straight people. Solidarity with the earth would take a truly radical act of imagination, and yet we've taken such leaps before. Now, the process of creating solidarity, creating a larger we, doesn't mean that there isn't also a they. And this has been a hard one for me to learn and accept. It's not that we aren't all ultimately in this together and interdependent on each other. We are. But we also need to recognize that there are those who deny our interdependence and who seek to disrupt solidarity and conquer by dividing, seeking to win for themselves in a win-lose zero-sum game. But that doesn't mean we need to write off everyone who's gotten sucked into that zero-sum game, and we don't need to play the same zero-sum game ourselves. The story of solidarity, that there's a larger we to be created, behooves us to keep working to grow that larger we by reframing the story of what's happening in our society and to help others reinterpret their lived experience of the last decades so that more and more and more and more of us can find common cause with each other. An organization called We Make the Future is working to generate solidarity and create that larger we by developing narratives that incorporate race and class together, narratives that neutralize the dog-whistle racism of the divide and conquerors, narratives that resonate across racial differences, narratives that bring along the largest possible group of people in support of the common good. One example is like this. It goes like this. I believe that most of us, whatever our race, background, or age, want a better future for our families and our country as a whole. But some politicians and corporations behind them are using all kinds of issues to hide the fact that a few people at the top are calling the shots and getting richer and richer, while the rest of us are left out and left behind. They keep us fighting each other instead of coming together to build a country that works for all of us, no matter what we look like, where we come from, who we love, or how much money we make. By joining together as voters across race and place, we can elect leaders who are about respecting everyone and caring for all. Please vote for decency and democracy in this year's elections. This kind of message has been proven to be effective in reaching out to working families of all races, not necessarily those who are committed to a much narrower vision, but to those who are looking for someone to share their struggles. And I think we all have an opportunity to reach out and share that more inclusive vision, not only in this election season, but throughout the year. And of course, we need to practice this vision and not just preach it. Beyond the work of reframing and telling the story of solidarity, there's the work of actually living the story through actual relationships of solidarity. Solidarity is not just an evidence-based theory or even just a story. It's a practice of reaching out to others, listening to them and what they care about, sharing a vision of what we care about, and inviting them to join us in common cause together. This practice of listening and sharing and inviting is central to what the UU Advocacy Network of Illinois, the network that I lead, is all about. UUANI works to get us talking to each other in our congregations, listening to each other deeply about what unites us in terms of our deeply held values, the things we care most about. And then we use that same process to reach out beyond our congregations to those in our communities, asking what they care about, sharing what we care about, seeking to find common cause together. And I look forward to the conversation after the service with the social justice group about how UUANI and UUSG can continue to work together more closely to put our UU values into effective action. At a deeper level, solidarity as a practice can counteract the epidemic of loneliness and isolation that fuels so much of the polarization and division in our society. I heard about a recent survey in which 24% of young adult males have no close friends. Think about that. UU congregations can play a part in addressing that kind of loneliness by reaching out to people in our communities and inviting them to join us in building a better world together. Because the work of solidarity can't just happen at the individual level. there needs to be an infrastructure to support and grow that sense of a greater we. The right wing has been extremely effective in using evangelical churches as part of their infrastructure to propagate a reactionary and exclusionary vision of white Christian nationalism. Our congregations can be and are places to tell the story of solidarity and interdependence and the possibility of a greater we. And our congregations are places to practice solidarity in real relationships, reaching out beyond ourselves to those who may be looking not only for a place of connection, but for a place to become part of a cause greater than themselves. Earlier, I mentioned the importance of imagination in generating a sense of collective identity that creates solidarity. The biggest imaginative leap may be generating a sense of shared interest among those who may not agree on many issues or even fully respect each other yet. At the closing service of the UUA General Assembly in June, Reverend Reverend Molly Hausch Gordon suggested that many people out there may be afraid of losing something that's important to them, just as we may be afraid of losing something that's important to us in the battles raging all around us. She suggested that we might dare to ask, where are their hearts broken? Where are our hearts broken? Can we help each other heal? I think that's a fundamental question of our current era. Can we help each other calm our fears and heal our broken hearts? As the Beatles put it in Let It Be in their final album, when the broken-hearted people of the world agree, there will be an answer. Let it be. For though we may be parted, there is still a chance that we will see. There will be an answer. Let it be. A solidarity of the brokenhearted may be one way we move beyond the raging battles of our time. Such solidarity may require a new kind of politics, a politics of vulnerability, rather than just a politics of fight. And it may be scary, but I think it might be just a little less exhausting and a whole lot more rewarding. May we live the solidarity of the brokenhearted in our interdependent yet broken world.
Visit us at UUSG.org.